So it's very warm. We should be having some cold temperatures. We would normally have a little bit of snow, maybe not on the ground, but we would have had some snow prior to the 18th of December when we are recording.
I think we should start every podcast with a detailed weather report. I'm really enjoying this. Carry on.
Because you can't get that anywhere else. I mean, right? But yeah, a lot of rain. There's water in my basement. I get soaked walking home, and it's just very uncharacteristic. I've lived here much of my life, and I've never had a mid-December rainstorm like this, full of wind.
Do you think you might lose power?
We lost power here at the house earlier when I was at school for at least 2 hours. But yes, if I just disappear or go silent. That was a joke. If I go silent at some point, it means that we lost.
That was good. I literally fell for that. That was good.
Yeah. Should have waited longer. It's all tiny.
Welcome to the Two Real Cinema Club. I'm James Ruzika.
And I'm Andres Lorente. And every week on the Two Real Cinema Club, we watch an old movie, we watch a new movie, we talk a lot about both of them, trying to draw some connections. And we're looking at the joys and pitfalls of privilege this episode as we watch the new Alexander Payne film, The Holdovers. We'll compare it to the 1980s British film Another Country.
So, had you seen Another Country before?
Nope, never even heard of it. Well, I've heard of other countries. I'm not that ignorant, but I've never heard of the film Another Country. And originally I thought it was a bad title, and then I thought about it, and I think it's actually not a bad title.
It was a kind of a very zeitgeisty film in Britain in the 80s. And when we come to it, I will read you the list of all the British actors who got their stars either in this film or in the stage play version of this film. It was a launch pad for basically everybody who was a kind of young, handsome British actor in the early 80s.
Yeah, they all look like little boys. It's funny, they're people you know, but they're little boys.
Does that say something about Another Country, or does that say something more about to you and me? And even the policemen are looking younger now. But before we talk about Another Country, we should talk about the new Alexander Payne picture, The Holdovers. So you recommended this. It's not out officially in the UK until next month, but it was out in the US in November. Am I right?
Yeah, I feel like it's been out just before American Thanksgiving, so maybe in the 20s of November, somewhere there. It's usually when we start to get a lot of award season fodder coming out, and this is among that class of films, I guess. So I'd say it's been out for probably just about a month, maybe a little less.
And I'm delighted to see. I knew very little about this. I'm delighted to see it's a Christmas film.
It is.
Amazon here have been advertising Your Christmas or Mine Too on the sides of all the buses, and I was starting to worry that we would have to cover that as our Christmas film this year. But no, The Holdovers has saved us.
Yes,
it's a Christmas picture. With a lot of heart.
Yeah, that did work out well. Yeah,
directed by Alexander Payne.
Yeah.
And in many ways, it feels like a sequel to Sideways.
Oh, Paul Giamatti immediately makes you think of that. I think of Sideways, of course. And I think this might be the first time they've worked together since Sideways.
I think it is.
Yes, okay.
Interestingly, apparently Paul Giamatti was originally cast as the lead in Downsizing, Alexander Payne's film from about 6 years ago, which in the end went to Matt Damon. I think he spent a long time writing and preparing that film, and Paul Giamatti was attached for a while. I haven't seen Downsizing. I haven't seen Nebraska. I have seen The Descendants. I have seen Election. I have seen About Schmidt. So I'm fairly familiar with his work. What I was not familiar with about Alexander Payne is that he was one of the co-writers of Jurassic Park 3. Did you see that?
Heaven, no. Goodness, no, please, no. Please, no.
Now, I'm happy to fight anybody who disparages Jurassic Park 3, because I remember seeing that many years ago, and it's a lot better than than I really expected. A lot better than it kind of deserves to be. Jurassic Park 3 actually a pretty fun romp.
Do you think that's due to the writing?
Almost certainly. Any film that's a fun romp. Yeah, okay. I put it always down to the writing, absolutely. Apparently, he was also an uncredited writer on Meet the Parents. You must have seen that.
Yeah, definitely saw that, yes.
And it's only after I read that I realised, you know what, there is a little bit of an Alexander Payne flavour to Meet the Parents, which I can identify in that film. You're right.
So he must be a bit of a script doctor.
I guess he must be. But I have a copy of Sideways on my shelf. I think he's earned his script doctoring fees because I think he's a terrific writer. Right, The Holdovers, this year's picture. Tell you what, shall I tell you the story?
Please do. It's a Christmas story. I need one.
It's a Christmas story. Cue Christmas music.
Do we have Christmas music? Hey, no.
This is the closest I could find to Christmas music, which coincidentally is exactly the same as the normal music. But
this is a classy operation here.
If I try really hard before I put the pod out, I'll dub some jingle bells over the drum part. It is December 1970, and at Barton College, a posh Massachusetts private school, and I'm going to check with you. I presume a fictitious school.
Barton, as far as I know, but oddly enough, I went and started researching some of the schools where it was filmed. I've got a friend who went to, she recognized a lot of the locations. She even said she drank port in the back of a chapel, which is seen in one of the scenes of the film. It was mostly that she went to Northfield Mount Herman, so it's Western Massachusetts, but I think that some things were shot at some other schools as well. But Barton is fictitious, as far as I know.
Fine, okay, right. Fictitious, but barely disguised. Yeah. Okay, so it's Christmas, and a small handful of pupils must remain at school over the Christmas break, supervised by Mr. Hunnam, Paul Hunnam, the classics teacher, who is Paul Giamatti in this film, and supervised by Mary Lamb, who is the school cook. So there is the usual friction between jocks and nerds and new boys and older boys, until one of the boys' fathers shows up to take all of the holdovers away for an impromptu skiing trip. Everyone except Angus, who is a clever but malcontent boy whose parents cannot be reached in time to approve the trip. So, for Christmas, it's just Angus, Mary, and Paul left at the school. But each of them, it's a movie, each of them has secrets and depths, and perhaps as a little trio, they will all learn something more from each other than just the dates of the Punic Wars.
Wow. That's lovely.
Do you like that? I didn't. There's been a big thing about plagiarism in social media that I've kind of seen on YouTube the last 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah. Usually I write my synopses myself because I think, it's good practice. It proves that I've seen the film, type something out. And 2 weeks ago, I was in a rush, and so I cribbed some of the synopsis from Wikipedia, and immediately this big controversy about plagiarism erupted across the internet, and I felt extremely sheepish and guilty. So that was my own work, I promise. I didn't steal that from anybody.
That's great work.
As we already said at the top of the show, this is kind of the sequel to Sideways, isn't it? Insofar as it's Alexander Payne again, it's Paul Giamatti again. Yeah. It surprises me that they haven't worked together since.
Yeah,
because it feels like the two of them go together so well, and Sideways and this film pair together so well. They're both, they're kind of buddy comedies.
Yeah,
they both have quite cerebral main characters.
Yeah,
they both kind of have these central themes about isolation and regret, and substance abuse, romantic misadventure, redemption. I feel like they go hand in hand, these two films. They belong together. And if any film sits next to the shelf with Sideways, that's a pretty impressive place to sit in my book.
Yeah, they also have the road trip. It seems to be kind of an Alexander Payne trademark. Yeah, when we were looking for another film to pair with it, I was suggesting Election, but more on the school angle. But I think you're right. I mean, I think probably that's the thing about his body of work is they're all going to go well together, because I think he's really looking at human frailty in some ways, and how we get through hard times, and the frustration of life sometimes, and how it you find joy in these bizarre moments, and I think Alexander Payne's really good at doing that. Sort of does feel an extension of his character, Paul Giamatti's character, Miles from Sideways, because he's this. Remember, he had that big book that he was lugging around. He was writing his book, and then he ends up just getting drunk and kind of looking over the book and not being very happy with what he'd written. But here in this book too, it's in this film too, he's doing some writing from a historical perspective, but he's I think he's got great range, and I don't think he's playing the same character, but you definitely relate to him in one because it's Paul Giamatti, and in this film his name is Paul.
Right.
And I think it's a similar journey. It's not, Paul Giamatti's never going to play the handsome romantic lead, I don't think. But he does play these sort of intellectual, comic, self-effacing characters very, very well, I think. So he's just human. He's just human. I think, and that's one thing that came to me in watching this film, is that Alexander Payne makes films for humans.
Yeah.
And that's might be a really stupid thing to say, because most people who go to see films these days are actually humans, although we are getting into the AI generation, so things are going to change. People are going to start making films for AI so that they can sort of retell the films to humans.
While the AI instruct us to sweep up the popcorn. Yeah. Exactly. Yes. It's. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think that the word that I wrote in my notes after watching this was, "This is a wonderfully crafted film." I think it's just a terrific example of craft. I was grinning all the way through. I just couldn't really help it. It's just so tremendously satisfying. Yeah. Although we'll probably come onto this. Part of the sheer neat satisfaction of the film did leave me feeling like maybe it is very slightly pat, and maybe it is a little bit self-satisfied as well as satisfying. I don't know. So I mean I think we start with some fairly stock characters, but they are allowed to develop. We do learn more about them. And by the end of the film, they are kind of proper 3D characters with kind of proper detail and nuance. I think you've phrased it very well. These are characters that feel like real, actual people. Yeah. To begin with, they look a little bit like archetypes, but they are allowed to deepen, and we do perceive them as real, proper people. Yeah. With many layers by the end of the film.
Something very interesting about the structure of this film and the craft of this film is that you start out with quite a number of characters. There are a lot of students, there are a lot of professors. And then they start getting picked off sort of one by one because they're going away for vacation. It reduces to this 5 young men and Giamatti and Mary in this enclosed space. So the stock characters, I think, start to disappear more and more, and you finally just get to the heart of the story, which is the 3 characters who are left behind, the true holdovers. And then the depth, I think, happens. But there's a lot of shorthand early on. You've got the jock kid, the stoner kid, the young kid who's going to cry, the kid from another country, whatnot. All these people are with us for a short period of time. All of those stock, stodgy old professors or private school teachers are gone after a very short time, and you're just stuck with the 3 people, and you're stuck with them at the school, and then the depth, I think, really starts to emerge. And then they sort of develop and even go into other worlds where they are maybe less comfortable, and that gives you the story. So I do agree with you that there's sort of a lot of shorthand and stock character stuff at the beginning, but it doesn't last for long, which is a real positive thing. I think it's smart.
We got to about the 40-minute mark in the film, and I was the one who suggested we should pair it with another country, and I was starting to kick myself thinking, no, we should have paired it with the Breakfast Club, because this is like the posh kids' breakfast club, and it kind of is until about the 40-minute mark. Yeah. And it looks like that's all the film is going to be until it takes this sudden left-hand turn, like you say, and they thin out the characters. Yeah. So it's a clever film. It does continue to subvert your expectations every half hour or so. They pare away a little bit further, or they peel back another layer, or they look a little bit deeper, or they change the focus. These kind of regular intervals. It's a clever way of structuring the film. And we'll talk a little bit about the opening. I know that you often like to talk about opening image and closing image. Yeah. And so I kind of thought I would try and pay attention to that this time around. I find it hard to pay attention. You know what I'm like. The opening image is of a whole bunch of kids who we never see again for the rest of the film, with a choir master who we never see again for the rest of the film. Yep. And they're singing in this kind of close harmony. It is an interesting opening. I think it says something a little about people working together, but also sort of about something about privilege and about the rather etiolated sort of highfalutin world that we are entering, without it necessarily really introducing any of the characters. But once you have that, then you have, and again, I often bang on about this, these nice little short scenes that sort of just key you into the archetypes that you're dealing with. So we start with Paul in his study, and he's kind of smoking his pipe and he's marking some term papers. And I don't know what you thought. I honestly, that tiny little scene, his crumpled little set of rooms in the attic. He's got a desk next to a window and books everywhere and a typewriter and a stereo that's playing. And it looks like a 1970s version of the LoFi HipHop girl on YouTube. Do you ever see that video?
No.
Well, it's just like a little 30-second animated loop of a girl studying with an animated cat next to her. And it's just like a constant YouTube stream.
Oh, really?
And she writes some notes on a bit of paper, then turns the page, and then the animation loops again. And so it's like just a constant looping video of somebody studying, while you have some sort of low BPM hip hop in the background. And it's supposed to sort of establish this mood of it's like a video to concentrate by. And this seemed like the 1970s version. I thought Paul Hunnam's little study in his crummy little rooms, that looked like my version of My Happy Place, I must say. That came up on screen. I thought, oh, you know what? I would. There are days when I would give my right foot to be that guy sitting in that little room with a low ceiling and a window that looks out on a field somewhere and a typewriter.
Yeah.
And music on a gramophone. It just looked fantastic.
Yeah, definitely characterization too. You're just showing someone in their most immediate environment early on in the film, so you get a sense of who he is.
And you clearly get a sense of how kind of lonely he is, don't you, with his sort of his rather grungy bath and his sink that has kind of grime crusted around it, and this is a place where an older man lives on his own.
Yes, and
it gets all of that information across visually. It's cute.
Information and inflammation. Correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't there a tube of hemorrhoid cream in the bathroom in that first scene? So you know this guy immediately. And as I was typing hemorrhoids, I realized I never really know how to spell hemorrhoids, and that's a good thing, right? It's just I'm not that intimately.
Yeah, that proves that you are not writing it on your grocery list every week. Exactly. Yes.
But again, great characterization within seconds, really.
And then, so we have these other little introductory scenes. We see Mary in the kitchen.
Yeah.
She's kind of organising lunch, and she's kind of like a little bit dour, but quite exacting. Mm-hmm. And she's the one who checks the clock and tells the rest of the kitchen staff to hurry up. Yeah. And then we have this kind of little mini scene of Angus, like in the dorm, being kind of bright, but sort of spiky and hard to like. So they each get their little introductory scene. It's kind of this great textbook screenwriting. We see each of the characters in their own milieu before you put them together. Yep. And so you know who they all are before the story commences. It's very good little efficient bit of writing. And
you do see you get a scene where he's teaching and he's presented as this sort of gruff, strict, tough guy teacher who's giving them homework over the break, a real stick in the mud. And I think it's at that point when one of the students says to him, at least pretend to be a human being, which I think is obviously, maybe this is, again, a film made for the artificial intelligence crowd or something like that. But, it's just that he doesn't really understand young people anymore. And he's, exceptionally hard on them. So the animosity between students, which includes Angus, and Hunnam is pretty clear early on.
But he's so cheerful and witty and erudite with it, isn't he?
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to hear him harangue the kids because he's full of great gags. I mean, there is, although we often say dialogue is the least important part of a script, there is some great dialogue in this script. Great, witty, clever, spiky, funny, heartfelt dialogue. I wrote a few down in my notebook here. Should we ring the spoiler bell, actually? Because I'm going to spoil something now. So we should ring the spoiler bell before we talk about the spiky dialogue.
I think we're a little late, but yeah, go ahead, Drew. It's that time. It's that time of year. We want to hear bells as often as possible.
I would never cope in a school like this. I'd just be late for everything, wouldn't I? I'd be the late kid. There we go. There's a festive bell for us,
or a festive cough.
Festive cough.
Seasonal cough for a spoiler bell.
At the very end of the film, Paul tells the head teacher as he's being sacked, he tells him, "You are and always have been the human version of penis cancer." it's just a great little gag. It's very, it's something where if I told you that was a line lifted out of Sideways, I would believe you.
Yeah.
But it's it lives at home very happily in this script. It's very funny. It's or there's the scene where Angus and Paul go to the museum and they look at some pots with kind of naked people on them in the kind of the Greek exhibit or whatever. And Angus tells him, when you describe it like that and add in some pornography, it sounds so much more interesting. Yeah. It's all great, cute little quotable, funny, well written lines. This is great quality screenwriting.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you're gonna have some dialogue, it should be with nice little flourishes and touches like that. Stuff that people will come up with, and they will say that. It's not, all over the script, but there are 5 or 10 of those little gems that really lift the whole script up, I think. One of my favorites is when Angus is going to be there, and Paul isn't really that interested in creating a home-like Christmas with garlands and decorations and all that. And Mary says to him, F-bomb coming up. She says, don't F it up for the little, can I say asshole? I think I can say asshole. Don't F it up for the little asshole, which is just a great line she says it very earnestly, but it really kind of sums it up because there is a lot of privilege that's addressed in this film quite openly, which is nice. And she has some love for Angus, certainly by the end of the film, because they sort of become this three amigos kind of situation. But it's nice that she says that early on. Like she's telling Paul he's got to do something for this. He's got to do something to make it special because Angus is definitely having a hard time.
You mentioned that kind of the P word there, privilege. And one interesting aspect of the way that the film is structured by gradually paring away its protagonists and then gradually tightening focus. I felt like every half hour or so, the theme of the film or the question of what the film is about kept changing. So I know I always like to ask you, what's the film about?
Yeah.
And I think you could take any one 30-minute section and decide that it's about something before moving on to the next one and seeing it as a different theme. What do you think the film is about?
Is that a hypothetical, or that's the question? That's the question.
That's like an actual question. It's because I know I'm not intelligent enough to actually spot it. So I have when we get to the difficult stuff, I have to just ask you blandly and openly. I like it when you gave me there three different options, because every 30 minutes the film is about something different. But I actually think it's about something very, very clear and tightly delivered here. And I think that for me, there's this triple tragedy at the end of the second act. Oh.
It's the holiday party. Mary has lost her son, who was a student at the school as well, probably one of the only black students at the school. And he was able to attend because she worked there. And the assumption is that she took the job so that he could go to school for free. And it's probably her first Christmas without him, or maybe second Christmas or something like that. So they're at this holiday party, the three of them together, and Mary breaks down over the loss of her son. Angus misses this chance at a real connection with a young girl at the party. I think they kiss. They're flirting over this wonderful finger painting scene. It's a lovely scene. It's a nice touch. It's kind of erotic, and you feel the energy between them. And Paul Hunnam learns that Lydia, who's the woman throwing the party, and he's excited he starts to see her as a romantic interest. And he's even sprayed himself up and down with household cleaner or something because it has this body odor problem. But a boyfriend of hers walks into the scene at this party. He's really getting excited to talk to her. And he kisses her and he realizes, she already has someone in her life. So there's this pain for everybody. It's this shared trauma moment. And I think for me, the theme really comes out of that because I think this film is mostly about empathy. Just having some minimal level of caring for one another at the very least. And from that, I think people can form friendships. And I think, you've got unlikely friendships that cross generations in this film. But I think they've all seen trauma in their lives and they're showing empathy for one another by the end of the film. And we learn more things after that, which is nice. But for me, that was sort of the end of the second act, because there was this down moment where everyone just got kicked in the stomach and then it spills into something else. And I understand why you're saying that they're you do get these different feels throughout the film, which is great. That's a real, to think, a real treasure in a film, to have a sort of a sense more of like the privilege in the first act, maybe some of the trauma and the difficulty, and some of the empathy in the last act. So it definitely touches on a few things. So you set me up with a trick question, and I tried to give you a coherent answer.
Yeah, you win. You win. I was trying to figure out what I would summarize the theme of the film, and I feel it's something like that you should acknowledge the past, but don't forget that there is a future.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like at the beginning of the film, all of the characters have this kind of slight attitude that it's sort of over for them in a way. I think that Mary has seen her son die, and it looks like she's finding it difficult to see any kind of future ahead. And Paul feels like he's kind of settling in for this kind of the comfortable last few years before he's kind of ready to call it a day. Can't imagine having any new adventures now. Mm-hmm. And even Angus, now that his family has kind of disintegrated, he sort of feels like his life has disintegrated with it, and all he can do is to respond is kind of be spiky, and he does his homework and keeps people at arm's length, and just keep your head down and get through it. Mm-hmm. And yet by the end of the film, they've all kind of confronted the pain and sort of explored the pain. I might come out of it feeling like that there is a future. Yeah. And they all make this similar journey, but they all kind of have different stops in the journey and a different a different quality to the journey. Yeah. But they all kind of make the same sort of journey. I think it's it's a great film, I think, and it's a powerful theme, well explored. Yeah. It's so well explored that I do sometimes feel like it occasionally veers into neat. There are some kind of plot points where it feels just very slightly too convenient, or too well balanced. It's composed like a classical painting, and with a little bit low on chaos and coincidence. But maybe that's a false impression, and I'm doing it down.
Well, I think I agree with you, but I think that is for the audience. I think that makes it easier to digest the whole story as an audience. And this is one of those films that really hits you with laughter and tears. So it's really kind of satisfying. A lot of what viewers need, I think. And for me, I think the chaos is really there. It's in this theme that we are all hot messes, and I think that's what they realize about one another. And it's interesting because I saw this film right around the time that I lost a very dear friend. And I just wish my friend had known that we're all hot messes. He wasn't the only hot mess. We were all hot messes, and we sort of accept each other as hot messes. And for me, there's this very poignant moment that I thought was a great bonding moment between Angus and Paul. And it's when Paul realizes that the two of them are on the same antidepressant. And I loved that moment. I thought that just showed how very clearly how all of a sudden Paul was going to understand that kid forever. And even if Angus didn't know that Paul was on the same antidepressant, at least Paul knew that. And I think that there was just a great bonding moment, and it just acknowledges that we all have lots of crap in our lives, and we have to know that, even if we don't know the specificity of the crap that we're going through or the others are going through. We have to know that. We have to accept one another and then show empathy for others. And for me, it's just so solid in this film. So it does give a neat ending because it's hopeful, and I think viewers generally need that. I think it would have been a drag if it had been darker. And it wasn't super dark. I mean, it's definitely Alexander Payne. He just really balances the comedy and the sadness very, very well. So I know exactly what you're talking about, but I think it's just like really neat filmmaking. He's just very clean, and he tells you a story. There's no doubt about, by the end of the story, it ends just fine, and you're not thinking, oh, what happened back there, or what was that all about? I mean, I think it's very clear what his intentions are, and it leaves you with that hope. But when you think about it, it's Paul sucking Crown Royal out of a bottle and spitting it onto the road as he goes off into his future. So it's not that clean or that hopeful, really.
Yeah, one of the most admirable things actually about that little scene with the Librium prescription is that they don't dwell on it.
Yeah.
And it must have been so tempting to come back to it or, to kind of write another 2 pages of dialogue about it. And they don't. It's like it's a glance and you move past it and it's acknowledged and moved past. That's restraint and control, which are, two of my favourite characteristics in good writing. Another thing that I have to mention before we move on is how much I liked the look of the film.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure there was some simulated dirt on the print on the version that I saw.
Oh.
And just like kind of the colours, the costumes, the set design, but even like the lenses, I think, the way that the stock was simulated, I'm sure they must have shot on digital, but it certainly feels
like film,
like it belongs in the 70s. It just feels so authentic. All the smoking, in so many scenes, while they're cooking, while they're marking papers, even while he's talking in the head's office, everybody is smoking a cigarette.
Yeah.
And even just some kind of great 70s songs. I looked up the soundtrack on Apple Music, and clearly there's some licensing issue because you can't listen to it in the UK.
Oh.
But it's been a great few years for Cat Stevens. Great to hear Cat Stevens again.
Yep.
The whole thing doesn't feel like it's full of the obvious choices for the costumes or the soundtrack. It's just feels authentic and real. It feels to me like if somebody, if you didn't know any of the actors and somebody told you that they had unearthed a 1972 classic and then showed it to you, you might possibly believe them because I think they have a very authentic feel for time and place in this film.
Yeah, it's well done. I definitely had that feel, and I'll harp on this again regularly on this podcast, but I love having no cell phones in a film. I love the low-tech feel. I remember the 70s to a certain extent, even though I was very young, and it just felt like being home again in some ways. And I just think the pacing is, it's not like a super fast-paced film or anything like that, but the pacing is comfortable. And again, it's human. There's something superhuman about it. Low tech. When you set a film in the 70s, I think it just opens up all these possibilities of just calming down and settling down and really exploring people as opposed to exploring their possessions, I guess. So I love that, and I agree with you. Even the opening title sequence, it looks like it's got these old film company kind of slides to open it up. It's just it's fantastic.
And before we move on, one other thing that is kind of worth singling out, I think. So great casting, a lot of great performances. Paul Giamatti, just effortlessly fantastic, brilliant. Divine Joy Randolph. I sat through a lot of the film thinking, where have I seen her before? And I think it is from that Martin Short, Selena Gomez series. Only Murders in the Building. That's in it. I think that is where I've seen her before, but nowhere else. She hasn't done an enormous amount of work, and she is just fantastic in this. The other person I kept scratching my head over for the whole of the film until I looked up the Wikipedia page afterwards, Dominic Sessa, the young actor, plays Angus Tully. You know what he's done before?
Some high school theater or something.
Yeah, that's right. Nothing is the answer. Nothing. He's done nothing. Absolutely incredible. He somehow seems to have been gifted with the voice that sounds like an extremely experienced voiceover artist.
Yeah.
So all the way through, I was thinking, I know this guy's voice from something. What's he been the voice of? He's done something that I've heard. No, he hasn't.
Nothing.
He's just got that fantastic, beautiful voice. He's just so listenable. There may be a chance that Dominic Sessa is basically playing himself in this film, but you know what? If he is, I expect to see him play himself in a whole bunch of other films because I enjoyed spending time with him, and I'd happily spend time with him in a bunch of other feature films as well. Yeah, he was so watchable. Great performance. Fantastic.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, well cast. I mean, you get a good script with good actors, and you're probably going to make a good film, especially if you're Alexander Payne. I mean, he makes it look so effortlessly perfect. So it's a real accomplishment for him, I think.
But then I know we were talking about privilege, and I'm sure we will probably talk about privilege more when we come on to the B film this week. But no matter how privileged you are, there is one group that you can never hide from.
Cliche squad. Yeah, those guys are good. They will out you anywhere.
I'm gonna preface my call to the cliche squad by saying I think there are plenty of cliches in this film, and I honestly didn't mind.
Yeah, of course not.
So, like, the clever but aloof teacher who learns from his pupil, the rebel kid who hides his heartbreak and confusion.
Yeah.
Christmas is a time of loneliness and isolation. I made this kind of list that just goes on and on. But they're all there. But it's the craft, I think, with which they are used. This film is so well crafted that I'm happy to accept them. They're, maybe I'm going to call them archetypes instead of cliches because I feel well disposed. Perhaps that's the polite name for a cliche, an archetype. So there are cliches, but you know what? When the film turns out as well and as entertaining and as high quality as this, I'm prepared to give it a pass.
Yeah, for me, I think I got sucked into a brain set reset somehow. It was that because it's a period piece, it's almost cliche resistant to me because it comes from this era which is basically the primordial stew of cliches in the making. Even that it wasn't made in the 70s, but it's set there. So as you said before, it passes on almost unmistakably for an early 70s film. So I felt like, the cliches are there, but this film is 50 years old, so they can't really be cliches. How wrong I was.
Invented the cliches.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm with you. I didn't mind them at all. But should we go into a couple, or did you did a nice little list there?
Well, I think we should go into a couple, only just because I know that the cliche squad will find me if I don't if I don't report something having actually called them up. Right. My top cliche here. So I've only written down one, but I've written a little paragraph about it in my notes here. Character with a family photograph. I don't know about you. When I was at film school, when we were there together, it was Roger Hyams. One of his precepts that he taught me was that if you write a scene with a character looking at a photograph, your script is in trouble. Is what he used to say, and I still think that is true. Wonderfully written, though I think this film is. Angus is largely introduced when we see him looking at a photograph of his family. In that moment, even at the time, I was very slightly oof.
Yeah.
I know we talk about visual storytelling on the pod, but this is not what we mean.
Yeah.
People looking at photographs, does not count. So I will give it a black mark for that, even though it does feed into an amusing scene where somebody writes something rude on the photograph and then throws it back at
Yes.
Okay, so it's kind of a setup for a gag, but nonetheless. Have you got anything on your list that you want to confess?
I've got a couple. I think the jacketed with elbow patched private school teachers being all serious and older is a bit of a cliche. A lot of those jobs in the Northeast here don't pay well, so they actually tend to be young teachers who are early in their careers and are basically going to parties with students as opposed to being that strict. But it's an image we have, and again, it's that shorthand. You know where you are in this film within the first few minutes because you see Paul Giamatti as that kind of teacher.
Can I quickly ask a point of order here?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
The students at these schools are under 18?
Yeah, probably. So these schools function like public schools, more high school. I mean, you saw some students who were probably middle school aged, which would be, I don't know, like 10 to 13 or something like that.
Right, yeah.
But most of them, as far as I know, are boarding schools where students would be what we could say high school age, so 14 to 18 or something like that. But some of them will have what we'd call a postgraduate program where if you didn't do particularly well in your public high school and you had some money, you might go do an extra year at one of these private schools in order to just make up your grades and get into a better university. Some athletes go to these schools because they'll have great sports programs, so it gives them a chance to learn their craft a bit more before moving on to a big school. So
if you are a young teacher going to parties with the kids at your school, that won't necessarily raise an eyebrow, or will it?
Nowadays, for sure. In the 70s, I think probably not as much.
Yeah, you are right. Actually, in the 70s, the rules were very different.
I mean, I have a number of friends who their first teaching jobs right out of university, so they would be 22 to 25, sort of. First 2 or 3 years of their careers were teaching 18-year-olds, so there's just a 5-year difference there.
Okay.
So you've got not fully formed adults teaching certainly not fully formed adults, so it can be a cesspool, I think. But my other cliche is It's about spatial awareness, I think. I always get concerned when I see people packing trailers and moving to that next stage in life because there's just some loosey-goose stuff there with loose objects that are going to move around because these things start to settle and resettle as the journey goes on. So renting trailers and packing them poorly before you leave behind on a major life change, that to me is a cliche. And I want to see the larger boxy objects are going to go in the front. I want to see a carefully packed van. That's what I want to see in one of these films. I don't want to see this haphazard arrangement of goods in the back of a trailer.
There is a great French science fiction film about time travel, which I can't remember the name of. And it's like, if I so badly cannot remember the name, that I'm going to look up the name of the film as we talk. No, not that. Yeah, come on, Google. Help me out here. I've even got the DVD on. In fact, you know what? I'm going to put my headphones down and I'm going to look for the DVD on my shelf here before I carry on with this anecdote. Okay. Hold on.
I could talk about another potential cliche that actually kind of doesn't happen in this film. I love this moment at the end where Angus thanks Paul for being human as opposed to like a human teacher as opposed to being thanked for a superhuman teacher.
I found it. Time crimes.
Okay. I was just telling
what was I missing?
I was just telling the listeners about this moment that could be a cliche, but it's not, and it's really well done in the film. It's at the end where Angus goes up to Paul as he's at the poorly packed trailer that we just mentioned a moment ago. He thanks him for like sort of being a human teacher, not for being a superhuman teacher. In Dead Poet Society, for example, like Robin Williams is this superhuman teacher, this great teacher, but it's actually kind of, it sort of reverts the cliche, I think, in the sense that he's just thanking him for being who he was and not being like this super teacher. And they never say that he's a great teacher, I don't think. He doesn't look like a great teacher, right? So it's just a nice thing. It could have been a really cliche moment, but that was something I really liked in the film. And it also killed a little bit of time when you were going to get that film from your shelf.
I hope you've killed enough time for people to forget that I said it was French, because it's not French. Time Crimes is a Spanish film about a guy who inadvertently ends up traveling backwards and forwards through time. But the very opening shot of the film is a shot of the character who gets home and finds that the back of his car is sprung open on the drive home.
Oh, God.
And there's an absolutely enormous mess strung out behind him all the way up his driveway onto the road of all these things that he must clean up and tidy up. And that opening shot of the film basically summarizes what he has to do for the whole of the rest of the film, because he travels through time and continues to mess things up worse and worse and worse, and have to go back, try to tidy it up, and then mess it up even worse. So it feels to me like maybe Paul Giamatti's trailer is just a foreshadowing of the time travel movie which he's going to make next.
Nice. Thank you for that. So now I'm going to watch that film just to see a trailer. Well packed or not.
Shall we have a break? And then we will come back and we will talk about another film about another school for the wealthy, another country.
Ooh.
Here at the Two Real Cinema Club, we're happy to announce a new podcast starting in the new year. It's going to be called What Stupid Thing Has Elon Musk Done This Week? In it, we'll be looking every week at what new idiotic thing Elon Musk has done each week. Maybe he'll launch a new truck made out of paper. Maybe he'll turn the Twitter logo into a swastika for laughs. Maybe he'll announce that he's planning to live on Mercury by the end of next year. Maybe he'll claim to have invented money, but a completely new kind of money that's made from carrots, but digitized. Maybe he'll sack everyone who works for him who has the name beginning with the letter P. Then he'll spend millions of dollars booking a stadium where he'll promise to take on Greta Thunberg in a wrestling match. And then he'll launch a new AI chatbot called Vladim AI Putin. And then he'll get a picture of Joe Rogan tattooed on his chin, but cover the tattoo with a beard and then shave the beard off live at a press conference as he shouts out, "How do you like them beans?" They're all about as likely as each other, and we will be covering all of these stupid things that Elon Musk does every week in What Stupid Thing Has Elon Musk Done This Week? In fact, given recent events, we might need to make the podcast twice weekly.
Or daily. I think that's... If no one else has done that, we've got to get that going fast. That is gold.
God knows there's enough material there.
Yes. And we are back to talk about another country. And that's the name of the film. We're not just going to talk about geography here or some other political situation in the world. Although we might do that. But we're going to talk about another country, which is, I think, a film from 1983 or 1984.
Yeah.
Directed by Marek Kaniewska and written by Julian Mitchell based on his play. The previous credit that I saw for Julian Mitchell was Vincent and Thea, which is a film that I want to see, but I've actually never seen it. I remember wanting to see it and not seeing it back in the mid-90s, maybe.
And that feeling has stayed with you.
Yeah, for years and years, because I know it has Tim Roth, I believe, who plays Vincent van Gogh.
Yeah, I think it does. It's a Robert Altman picture, isn't it? And I think, now I could be wrong, but I think there are two versions of it. There is a feature film version, and then the same material was then converted into like a television series or like a limited series.
Oh, nice.
So I think there are two different versions that you can see. He also wrote Wild, the Oscar Wilde film with Stephen Fry. I don't know if you've seen that. Yeah,
I've not seen it, but that was the other film credit that I did recognize.
And then a bunch of episodes of Inspector Morse. So is that something that's made it over to the US? Inspector Morse, do you know what that is?
I do. I've seen a little bit of it, but I'm trying to think if it may have been when I was in England when I saw it. But I think it had played on. Exactly. I think it went on syndicated or cable TV here in the States at one point.
Fine. For about 15 or 20 years, it was utterly unavoidable in the UK, I think. Yeah.
Sure. Do we know if the play was also called Another Country?
I believe it was. Okay. Yes, absolutely.
So I alluded earlier to the title that it seemed very simple. And at first I didn't really like it as a title, but I think he's talking about an England that no longer exists, number one. And then it does sort of start in Soviet Russia as well. So one of the characters sort of ends up in another country as well. But I'll get your take on that. If you can give us a little context or background and tell me why we paired these two films together.
Do you have any other questions for me, Counsel?
So when you suggested the Holdovers, and I'm so glad you did, I just had a little look at material from the film, and so the first thing that popped into my mind was another country. I think in part because of that sort of feeling of wealthy kids in a school with that kind of rural private school architecture. Yeah. They're both films set in the past, but they are kind of both films sort of about privilege and problems that we see in the world today. Yeah. So I feel like, the two of them, they are kind of covering similar ground. It was only after I watched the whole of the Holdovers that I realized that, I had only based my decision based on about the first 40 minutes of that film. And if we had chosen a film after I'd watched the whole of the Holdovers, then maybe we would have gone with Sideways or something like that. Yeah. But if you've watched that first 40 minutes of the Holdover, then Another Country, I think, is what pops into my mind. I think the two deserve to be compared.
Oh, definitely, yeah. They work well together. In this film, the cast includes what I call baby forms of Rupert Everett, Colin Firth, who's he's recognizable, but not clearly recognizable, and Cary Elwes. These are your three leads. They're all playing young men.
I promised earlier that I would talk about how the film was a launch pad. So the play, Another Country, was originally a theatre hit in 1981. Yeah. And the theatre production became a launch pad for a whole bunch of highly successful actors of the era. So including Rupert Everett, yes, Colin Firth, yes, but also Kenneth Branagh, got his kind of big stage start in Another Country, and Daniel Day-Lewis.
Wow.
So you think to write the play that starts the careers of those four, surely you would have British film producers coming up and buying you a beer every day for the rest of your life, wouldn't you?
Yes. Yeah. Well, it worked. They got the film made, that's for sure.
I made a few notes here. The film it had a budget of about £1.2 million. It got an award at Cannes for Best Artistic Contribution. I'm not entirely sure what that award is for or what it means, but I think they wanted to give it plaudits. They tried to shoot it at Eton, which apparently the school in the film is supposed to be. It's supposed to be Eton, although they never mentioned the name. Eton didn't want to be associated with it. Who's surprised there? So it was largely shot not at a school, but at Oxford University. And at the homes of a number of aristocratic families in the UK. So not only for a film about privilege, not only are some of these scenes shot in universities associated with privilege, but homes, personal people's actual homes associated with privilege.
Yeah.
Oof.
It definitely drips with privilege. My African students use that as a verb very often. Dripper. Tu es très drippé. You're dripping. Usually it's about clothing and the look. So it's very... I think a lot of that privilege is really held mostly on this visual plane of just what you see. You can see. They don't have to go into it and talk about how big parties they have or big great vacations they have with their families. You just see it. It's this very, very visual privilege that you see. And that's, it's done quickly and efficiently. Shall I tell you a bit more of the story, or is there?
Tell me the story.
So we open on this calm river. It's deep and slow, passing under a bridge through a public military school campus. It's probably Oxford, as you said, however. There's a quick move, sort of a flash forward, I guess is what that is. It goes to, we see a surtitle for Moscow, 1983. And I think that's Rupert Everett, but he's sort of like an old-looking geriatric kind of Rupert Everett. It's very bizarre because, of course, I said you see the baby forms of these actors that you know now. Here, he must have been, 20 years old, and he's playing
something like that.
80-year-old or 90-year-old. It's not so believable. It's kind of it's funny. It's funny. Anyway, he's in a wheelchair
because he's elderly because he's got lots of kind of wrinkly skin.
Yeah,
but he's still got and he's in a wheelchair, but he's got great posture, hasn't
great
he?
posture.
He's sitting up so straight.
His voice is perfectly fine and young. It's a little odd. So I might have cast someone a little older there. And in fact, I wasn't sure if it was Rupert's character, Guy Bennett, or if it was Cary Elwes's James Harcourt. But he's there, and it's, I think, for me, the beginning and the end, and we've talked about this a lot in the last couple episodes, but it's a little ham-handed. There's these bookend features where we get Guy Bennett, Rupert Everett's character at the beginning, and then we come back to him at the end. There's not a lot in between there. And there are a lot of photographs. We see a lot of photographs of the young boys on campus in his apartment in Moscow. He's old, infirm. He has like a man helper, perhaps, / lover caring for him. The man never has a line of dialogue, and we don't really know their relationship, but it's sort of by the end, I think they are partners. He's reminiscing about 1920s military school in England with a woman doing some sort of reporting on his life or something there. She found him in Russia after all these years and getting his take on his story as a youth in England. On that campus, 1920s, late 20s, it looked like, he's one of a gang of sort of rebellious students. They're experiencing this frustration and ennui in the ranks of this military education and all these school rules that they have to follow. And right away, we see that there's plenty of physical intimacy among the young men. It's not a secret, but it is sort of shunned by the administration and the old guard. They don't get really punished for it in any way. So it's sort of understood or accepted. But when caught in a sex act with another boy, one young man takes his own life. It's the character of Martineau that they refer to later on. So that sort of sets the tone of what's happening on the campus beneath the surface. As I said before, a lot of this is surface. You see the uniforms. They're basically going to school in castles. They're living in these elaborate, beautiful dorms. Really seems like it's an environment for great education where, in fact, it seems like they're not really studying anything and they're just playing cricket.
Yes.
On the campus, Bennett and some of the other boys aspired to being gods. As far as I could tell, they were the guys who got to wear waistcoats.
Like your own personalised coloured waistcoats.
They're very coloured waistcoats,
the peach-coloured waistcoats.
And then the following year, they would be sort of the cream of the crop of students. His buddy is Tommy Judd, played by Colin Firth, has no interest in perpetuating the English and the capitalist system. He's a seething communist. He's a fan of Stalin and the Soviet Union. He's openly critical of the school, and he really believes in revolution against colonialism. So you've got these young men who are really, I think, rebelling against some of the traditions of military school life in England. So Tommy, however, doesn't participate in a lot of the flirtations that the other boys sort of encounter and endeavor. But Bennett is the Rupert Everett character. He insists that everyone gives in the end. It's very interesting. Mothers don't know what is happening, he says, but the fathers do. So it seems like this is a tradition of when they're away from home and living among boys, they do have intimate relationships with other boys. And it's, as a result, they're hiding. It's this sort of game of playing that they're playing where they're hiding what they're doing on campus. And well, truthfully, they're just not really learning. I didn't see any. There are no schoolroom scenes. Like, at least the Holdovers has a scene where they're learning something, but there's not much investigation in that part of their lives. They play some war games. They play cricket, as I mentioned before. And Bennett has plenty of time to watch out his window, and he falls in love with Cary Elwes's character, which is James Harcourt, who lives in another house on campus. They eventually arrange a meeting in a restaurant. Shortly after Bennett attends the wedding of his mother to her new stepfather, who's another military man. And they start a relationship, and it has to be a clandestine relationship. And we learn right about that same time, I think he confesses maybe to Tommy, that Bennett's father died during sex, which gave me these whispers of Beau is Afraid. Do you remember Beau is Afraid?
Yes.
Film?
So do you think maybe he has a penis monster in the attic?
That's right. How did I forget the penis monster? Oh, it's good. Oh, boy. I'm sure we'll hear about that in our end-of-year awards show. And his family actually seems like they want Bennett to leave school and work. So I think there's a lot of pressure on Bennett. He's falling in love. He's bored at school. He's really crazy for James Harcourt, and sort of wants to have a relationship with him. But at this time, because of the suicide on campus and the death of the young man, that I think that's certainly shunned at school at that time. So that's kind of the first act. That's the whole setup for what's going to happen later.
What I find fascinating, so the film is largely sort of about homophobia. There's lots of homophobia in the film, and yet the thing which most offends the people who discover that some boys are screwing around with other boys isn't so much that it's two boys together, it's that he's screwing around with a boy from another house. That's the thing that really outrages them, isn't it? Which I think is which is the point. I think it's to show that the kind of divisions that you sow in society, it's important to choose what side you're on, and which house you're in at school is probably more important than whether you bat for this side or that side. It's all about keeping it in the house.
Keep it in the house, it was very odd. I mean, a lot of this, I loved this idea that the fathers knew what was going on and the mothers didn't, and the parents were just sort of pretending to know, and the students had to put up an appearance where this wasn't happening, whereas everyone knows it was happening. It reminded me of that last kind of creepy moment in The History Boys where the protagonist is saying that he's learned from his teacher to pass it on. Like, this is a tradition that's passed down through generations, so that even some of the military instructors who are on campus, and even Bennett's mother's new husband, they probably know what happened, and whether they participated in it or not, it happened. There was homosexuality on the campuses, in part because the kids are bored and there are no women around in some cases. And Bennett has this interesting perspective that everyone's going to start doing it. But Bennett says for him it's real. He prefers men. He really wants to be with Harcourt, and that's sort of what takes us through the second and third acts. I was going to ask you, how old are the boys in this one? I mean, you asked me that in the last one. I think they were maybe late teens or 20 or?
I think so. I think they are 17 and 18. Okay. Yes, absolutely. I think that's what age they are.
Okay.
We'll probably talk about my perception of the school in this film a bit later on. That the one aspect of the homophobia in this film that kind of struck me watching it was that it's a film set in the 1930s but made in the 1980s. At both of those times,
Yeah.
homosexuality was broadly illegal in the UK and certainly taboo.
Yeah.
And I think the whole point of making the play or the film in the 80s was to talk about attitudes to homosexuality in the 80s rather than just reflecting purely on a historical set of events. But we're watching it today in 2023 when Queer Eye for the Straight Guy and RuPaul's Drag Race are like primetime family TV shows.
Yeah, yep.
In the UK we have Strictly Come Dancing, which is like a huge BBC Saturday evening hit show, and where celebrities pair up with professional dancers and do dance routines. And I think it would be realistically impossible to make a season of that show now without at least one same-sex couple. I think if there wasn't one same-sex couple, then the audience would say, well, this is a bit prejudicial.
Yeah.
Where's the gay couple? That's not on. You can't have a purely hetero version of this show.
Yeah.
That's disgusting. I'm ripping up my license fee.
Yeah.
And in a way, I want to feel like, well, yay! Look, we often talk about progress on this podcast. That's probably progress, isn't it? That's great. And which doesn't mean to say that I'm saying to any LGBTQ listeners, yay, everything is rosy now. Sit down, keep quiet. But it is nice, isn't it? I think that somehow the homophobia in this film, maybe from my very lucky, privileged point of view, that P word again, seems a bit old-fashioned now.
Yeah, I think you had a good point before. If we didn't have LGBTQ characters in stories now, it would seem inaccurate somehow. Like you're not including them because it would be denying that they exist. It's interesting you talk about homophobia because for me it was just a very open examination of homosexuality at this school. There were a couple of characters, I guess, who disapproved, but they all understood somehow. So it was interesting to me. And a little caveat, when I realized that when I was talking about the History Boys, I left out a vital piece of information, is that they have a teacher who is basically seeking sexual favors from younger students. So there's a little pedophilia element to that film. So I really appreciated the openness of it. I thought that was, especially for 1984, 83, 84, I thought that was really, really, really honest and seemed revolutionary to me, given the year. And I imagine the play was a few years even before that. So back into the late 70s or early 80s.
That said, though it is honest, I'm slightly jumping the gun here with the synopsis. But when we do come to see, a little bit of cuddling between two characters, either the camera is extremely coy and looks away, or we're left with two characters having a little bit of a hug in a boat. And nothing tremendously sexy happens.
Yeah, it's tame. Yeah.
So it's still kind of pussyfooting around.
I was going to say a couple of years before My Beautiful Laundrette, which you do see a bit more affection, I think. This by comparison, this seems quite tame. Harcourt and Bennett start this secret courtship. They have to meet after hours and at night, sneaking out of their respective houses. And it's very secretive. And I think in part, I guess it's extra secretive maybe because of what happened to Martineau when he was caught with another boy. And there's this business of running down a drain pipe. I want to talk about setups and payoffs when we go into a bit more detail in this film, because the drain pipe is set up, and that's just a route for them to climb out of their sort of dormitory rooms and meet on campus. And then there's this bit about, there's sort of like a power play here too, because everyone wants to be a god. And there's this possibility that someone's going to leave the campus, which opens up a space for someone to be a prefect. It's offered to Tommy, the Colin Firth character. He's really not into that sort of hierarchical thinking to begin with. So, but it just seems like a natural stage that everyone wants to get up to be the god status. It starts to be jeopardized because Bennett is, he's much more interested in Harcourt, and of course, if he's found out, I think that he might lose the ability to become a god. And then Bennett is intentionally unprepared for this disciplined line. They're in a war game. I think, what did they call it, Jackabout or something like that? I forget what it was called. It was a game that they were preparing for. So he intentionally loses for his team, and then he's also busted for trying to meet up with Harcourt, and he gets flogged for not giving up James Harcourt's name, I guess, as the object of his affections. Bennett, this is the one. Bennett suggests that he's different from the others because his homosexuality is not just a phase that others pass through and grow out of. He says, I'm never going to love women. And he accuses Tommy of being judgmental. He says, you think some are better than others because of the way they make love. There's some great lines in there about just like addressing homosexuality for late teen men who are really in a very masculine world. There are two women in this film. It's Bennett's mother and the woman who's interviewing Bennett at the very end of the film. That's it. Found like there was a very sudden ending. All of a sudden, there's this one line, if only communism were true. He says that in sort of a voiceover as part of the interview he's doing with the young journalist. He says that Tommy died in the Civil War, so I assume that was in Spain. We assume he goes to live in the Soviet Union, that maybe he eventually did choose communism, for sort of following in Tommy's lead or to honor him. It's an interesting choice because I assume Russia or the Soviet Union was less tolerant of homosexuality than even England was. And the film just sort of ends right there.
I think the film assumes some knowledge which not all the people watching it will have, certainly not today, which is, I think the film is a barely disguised film about a real-life spy called Guy Burgess, who was... who was kind of somebody who had a job in the UK government, I couldn't tell you what, and then was spying for the Soviet Union, and then eventually he was kind of rumbled and defected and given a safe harbor there in the Soviet Union, which is why this woman turns up to interview him and find out about his life as a spy at the beginning of the film. So I think the filmmakers assume that that the old man in the wheelchair at the start of the film with the not very convincing makeup is a well-known British spy who has defected to the Russians. And then this is the story of explaining why it was that he decided it was right to betray his country and spy on Britain for those Ruskies. But now that we are 40 years after the release of the film, and people aren't quite so aware of the idea that people may be spying on behalf of the Soviet Union, it's a little bit of cultural knowledge which the average viewer won't have. So it's something the film fails to explain. Yeah.
So an opening title and a closing title might have helped. Even just not changing his name, because he's Guy Bennett in the film, and it's interesting because I think. This feels very theatrical to me. This feels like a play in so many ways. And one of my biggest thoughts on the film was just I don't as a writer, I don't ever want to feel too compelled to tether myself too much to the reality of a story. It's like if you want to make a great film, make it, and just you can say it's inspired by, or just make up new characters that basically stand in for the historical characters. Because if you follow the average life, it's pretty boring.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, and a spy's life should be more interesting. But this sounds really kind of close, maybe too close to the true story. So it doesn't. This is not an action film by any means. I wouldn't say like a whole lot happens in this film. It's a beautiful, looking film. It's a good looking film, but it does feel very theatrical. Feels very much like a play. The payoff at the end is this idea of what does he miss about England, and what does he miss about his school days? And he says, "I miss the cricket." And that's the very last line of the film. Obviously, they don't have cricket in the Soviet Union, but. I think maybe we should go to some of your thoughts because you obviously know the culture better. I mean, I liked the idea that this another country is really talking about how different, I guess, England is in the 1980s from what it was in the 1920s and 30s. But tell me things that I've missed.
Well, I saw the film when it was originally released, I think, or a few years after it was originally released, but in the UK, and. I remember, at the time, it being a very popular film with the ladies because there were so many
looking,
sort of beautiful, but slightly fey, but generally very attractive young men in the film. The camera loves the men in this film. They are absolutely beautiful, and as you say, there aren't really many female characters, but lots of beautiful young men to watch, and they all look absolutely ravishing. I feel like I clearly remember when I originally saw the film, there is a line in it And I don't remember hearing that line this time round. And maybe you can tell me either, oh, the line was in it, the line was not in it, or that line is from a different film and you're remembering wrong. But the line I remember is that Rupert Everett says, the past is another country, they do things differently there.
Ooh, maybe. I don't remember it.
Right, yeah, I don't remember it. And I wonder whether that line, which has rung in my mind for many, many years, is from another film or a poem or a song or something else completely unconnected.
Yeah, did you ever see the play? Maybe it was in the play but doesn't really appear in the film.
I don't recall going to see. So here we go. So it is a quote from L.P. Hartley, according to Google. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there.
Okay. Huh.
Well, okay, I don't know why that has wound up in my brain. It's just me conflating two different things. Oh, good.
That's okay.
Also, I was waiting during this film for the bit where the monkeys all get excited at that large monolith and then go to the moon, and that didn't happen either.
That definitely happens. That's a great moment. I remember that one. Not in this film. Didn't happen in this film. But
I do want to go back to what you were talking about for setups and payoffs.
Yeah.
Because I tell you what I wrote in my notes. The shape of this story is a bit blobby, is what I wrote.
Yeah.
Because it kind of establishes the stakes fairly early on. You learn that Guy, who is going to be our central character, he lusts after James. Good name, great hair.
Yeah.
He wants to become a god, one of the top prefects at the school, and but then two boys are caught having a little romantic tryst. Yeah, I wrote down in my notes they're having a bit of "How's your father," which is what people would have called it in the 1980s. And because of that, then there's a kind of a crackdown, and that means that Guy doesn't get his wish to become one of the elite.
Yeah,
but the film kind of sets up this notion, a character who wants or needs something. And then you make it difficult for them to get it. But then it doesn't quite connect the events, I think.
No.
So I feel like, a lot of the events of the film kind of bumble along. He has this kind of love affair, but it's very chaste. They just have a bit of a cuddle in a boat. And there's a bit of a talk about marks, and there's some climbing up a drain pipe. And, there's some passing backwards and forwards of notes. And then at the very end of the film, it sort of slightly comes to a head and Guy gets spanked. And none of that really seems to matter to him particularly. The thing that really stings is that he gets denied his promotion.
Yeah.
And somehow it doesn't quite manage to tie all these different stakes together. I feel like there should be a lot of tension in this notion that there's a limited number of boys who can be prefects, and if we don't have enough prefects, then you won't be able to get to be a god. And so Colin Firth's character has to compromise his ideals and agree to become a prefect, even though that's the last thing he wants, because he wants to help out his friend, and he has this big choice to make. Shall I go with my Marxist ideals, or shall I help out my friend and get him the thing that he wants? But somehow you never really feel the tension in any of these decisions, and it feels a little bit easy come, easy go, and a little bit arbitrary. And so the end of the film doesn't quite have the impact that it might. The story feels like it's there, but just needs someone to put a string around it and pull a bit tighter and just concertina it all together and let it become a little bit more integrated. It's an enjoyable film to watch. It's short. It's only 90 minutes. There's lots of beautiful things to look at. But doesn't quite come away with the tension that I think could have been there.
Not at all.
If it had just been a bit been a little bit tighter.
Yeah, I agree. It's a bit of a snoozer for a 90-minute film. And when I'm talking about payoffs, setups and payoffs, it's like no one ever falls from that drain pipe. There's never a superior watching the grounds at night. Kids can just go out, and you might as well just go out the front door. Why are you going down the drain pipe? And the drain pipe's in perfectly good shape. I want to see some vines. I want to see it like leaning and bending a little bit and eventually cracking and falling with the young man on it. The biggest of all, there's really no resolution for Bennett and Harcourt being together at all. I mean, the last 10 minutes, that story disappears, and that's sort of the main story of the whole film. Tommy's never set up to be a spy, or we don't really know. We're just told that he goes to, I assume, Spain. I thought it said the Spanish Civil War, but a civil war in the 1930s, and dies there fighting for the cause. And even the opening scene and closing scene, they don't really add much. And I even wonder, was that part of the play? I doubt it. It just seems like one of these film things that you glue onto a play in order to make it a film. Here's the bookend scenes. So as a result, I just wasn't really that invested in the characters because I wasn't worried about them at any time. They were, privileged boys on a college campus or a school campus and not getting into trouble. They got to get into trouble. And yeah, there's never any pressure on James and Guy when they're sort of breaking the rules and meeting together at night. Nothing. So yeah, I think there were just some obvious things that seemed like, and maybe they didn't exist. Maybe the drainpipe didn't exist in the play. I find that hard to believe. But
I wonder whether someone falling off a drainpipe is a difficult, challenging thing to do in a play and do it safely and do it well.
Sure.
And so you think, well. You're just not going to write a play where that is your big pivotal plot point. It's a bit dangerous and a bit a bit scary. So instead, you make your plot points all kind of emotional, and you have lots of scenes of people talking in rooms. And so when it becomes a film, well, you don't have the option of taking the most pivotal, exciting, action-packed plot points from the play because they aren't there.
Yeah.
So you end up, trying to expand it and make it a little bit more visual and a little bit more physical. But none of the visual, physical things you introduce can be major plot points if you're going to stick to the shape of the play. Instead, you just end up with set dressing in between people talking in rooms, which is the meat of the story.
Yeah,
I personally did enjoy the film, but largely from a visual point of view, and from I got a lot of the pleasure of having so many, it's that guy moments.
Yeah.
And maybe that is where a lot of the pleasure exists still for this film. We saw Rupert Everett the other week in Napoleon, and he's still a good-looking bloke.
Yeah.
But a very beautiful young man in this film.
Oh, God.
And there's no shame in enjoying a film because there's somebody beautiful in it.
Yeah.
Right.
So many beautiful settings. I mean, it's a beautiful film just on the landscapes and the buildings and the architecture and the boys. It's got all that going for it, but I think, I don't know if it's like if that's the depth, it's not deep enough. If that's the top, the most the most gorgeous part, that's not deep enough. It's just that you just have that. You need something on one side or the other, either some more heart or more action on top of that. And I'm not really sure if that's the surface of the film or the bowels of the film. This film either needs more bowels and ugliness, or it needs more superficial stuff. It needs like some action on top of the boys. That sounds crazy. Needs something for them to do other than other boys and other than meeting up at night and not really doing anything.
I wonder whether this notion that nothing very bad ever happens to any of the boys in the film is kind of like a meta story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because that's going to be the story for the rest of their lives as well, isn't it?
Yes.
Apart, sadly, from Tommy, who gets killed in the Spanish Civil War, everybody else can look forward to a very comfortable life with a nice house in the country and a job with the government and probably a cabinet position.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the film, Guy is complaining bitterly, isn't he, that he's not going to become ambassador to, I can't remember what countries he says,
right,
but it's something like he's not going to become ambassador to Monaco. He's going to have to become ambassador to Madagascar or something like that, someplace that he doesn't want to go, which is not glamorous. Whereas, most people don't really have the option of being ambassador to any country, whether it's a nice one or a difficult one.
Yeah. I think there's a critical mistake, honestly. I think it's that if they're sneaking around and occasionally worrying about getting caught, or that for a good part of the film, then that's a different story than someone getting caught in the first 5 minutes and that person hanging themselves a few minutes later. If that is the end of Act 2, oh, excuse me, I just hit my microphone. If that happens later in the film, if Martineau actually kills himself at the end of Act 2, and we've had all this tension, then you've got something that we're worrying about the whole time. Who's going to get busted? What's going to happen when they get busted? But by having all that happen in the first 10 minutes, there's nowhere to go. It seems like you've wasted your one death kind of early on, and nothing's going to die at the end of Act 2. And so it's amazing. There's really no tension. I watched this film passed over me. I watched it, of course. I wasn't super engaged, but I just wanted more. I felt like there should be a lot more that happens.
Yep. No, I think I agree. I'm going to move the conversation on to our next segment because I think that may explain a little bit about what I saw in the film.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you to ask me Who am I?
Who am I?
James, who are you?
That is a good question because I basically I went to the schools in both of these films.
Oh my!
Or at least I kind of sort of did. I vividly saw a kind of a part of my life in both of these films. When I went to see the film originally, and I think I looking back now, I think I must have been at university.
Yeah.
But I saw it with some friends who had been to the same school that I did, because I remember they commented afterwards, basically, that was our school, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I remember my kind of much cleverer than me friend Jamal, I used to go and see films with, and he would see extremely deep, clever interpretations in them, whereas I would just see a bit of car chasing and a joke. And he kind of observed that the school in another country and the school that he and I had both gone to was basically the same, or at least the school that we went to would love to present itself as the school in another country. If our school published a glossy brochure, it would use photographs that were carefully posed to look like they were shots out of another country. But we had, my school didn't have borders. We didn't sleep in dorms under woolen blankets, but I went to school where we had houses and we had prefects and we had house prefects who were kind of like under prefects who would hope the whole year of them being house prefects that the following year they would be promoted from house prefect to proper prefect. We didn't have waistcoats, but we had ties, so we went to school in suits and we had ties. In the junior school, the tie had a colour which explained what house you were in. And then once you are a house prefect, you would get a different tie. And if you did well in your exams, you get a founder's tie, which would be a different tie that you could wear. And then if you had became a prefect, you had yet another tie, which showed that you were one of the elite. And you'd wear this special tie with pride and elan. There was a combined cadet force at my school, which means that every Friday, a huge number of the boys would dress up in army uniforms. They would spend, many, many hours polishing their boots and then practicing marching. And then, because you'd practiced your marching so well and you'd polished your boots so well, maybe one afternoon a term, you get to go to the school firing range and fire a rifle. All of these things really happened in my childhood. My school had a war memorial outside it, much like the kind of the statue in the quadrangle. The school in the film. Our war memorial was a statue of a young man in, I think, the First World War, who was jumping over the top to head into battle and gesturing to his comrades behind him to follow him to take on the enemy. I mean, looking back now and thinking of our contemporary attitudes to the First World War, that's a pretty grotesque statue to show to teenage boys as soon as they arrive at your new school. But this is the school that I went to. And I think although the school that I went to was not nearly as full of the great and the good and the highly influential, one of the old boys at my school did become Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK. And one of the old boys at my school was D.H. Lawrence, although the thing that the school doesn't tell you was that they threw him out after a year for writing his name in graffiti on one of the fireplaces. Oh. But
so you are these guys.
I vividly see myself on screen, although sadly I do not look like Rupert Everett or Colin Firth. I look like one of the spotty boys in the background who didn't get much screen time. But I very self-consciously identify with the kids in this film because I went to that school.
I think you're a bit more handsome than most of those guys, especially as an older man.
As an older man, you're right. Yes, but I don't have a Russian manservant to wheel me around in a wheelchair. That's what I'm missing out on. Yes.
Now, was that your take that he was a lover or a partner?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again,
exactly.
Pretty subtle.
He seemed to be a combination of manservant and lover, wasn't he? I suppose.
Exactly.
What's the term from Spartacus? Body servant.
Okay.
was what that man was, I suppose. Oof. Now that I've told you the story of my life, was there anybody in the two films that we watched today that you thought you resembled?
Yes, yeah. Well, when you see a doctor, you are a doctor. I've learned that on the program. When I see a teacher...
I don't have much imagination, you're right. Yes.
Well, no, I have no more than you do. When I see a teacher, I am a teacher. Paul Hunnam with Paul Giamatti with his body odor, his failing eyes, the strict, unchanging, old school demeanor, the miserly and unoriginal approach to Christmas gift giving. Doesn't he give Marcus Aurelius a memoir book to everyone at Christmas dinner? It's lovely. Plus that thing about listening. He's listening to the Beethoven Emperor Concerto at one point in the film. I'd been listening to that a lot lately in honor of Napoleon, Joaquin Phoenix, and Ridley Scott. So I really identified with Giamatti. But mostly on that, mostly on that level of just the teacher level.
You see, I can see you in him, but not because of the body odor. But because he's just so. I mean, he is tremendously clever, isn't he?
He's a clever guy.
For all that he may have personal faults, and he has issues and problems to surmount, he's a tremendously well-educated man. Extremely clever, extremely witty, very quick off the mark. He's never blustering around for a witty comment. He's always got one right there at the tip of his tongue. And you know what? For all the way that the kids complain that he smells and he doesn't understand them, I think Paul Giamatti in that film looks like great company.
Yeah.
I think if I had to spend the Christmas with him, we would have a blast.
Yeah, I think it would be a blast. I love his character. I love the actor. I think he does a great job, and I think he, as we start to synthesize a little bit, I think Payne's films are really about these very believable, very fallible characters, living very real lives, but introducing a lot of humor and whimsy to them. And I think for me, just being from a different culture and a different era, it was so much harder to identify myself with any of the Another Country characters. And I love Payne has this wonderful thing of putting those whimsical scenes into a film where people are just kind of doing stupid things, which is what people do. The firecracker in the New Year's Eve kitchen scene is wonderful. The arm dislocation, we should probably talk about that because you're a doctor and all that. Is it creme brulee or some sort of cake baked Alaska? They end up burning a box full of dessert on a car. He's got these scenes in there that are just so disarming and that's a pun because he gets the arm dislocated. Disarming and just so real. These characters who are just so real, and I think he really brings those kinds of stories to the screen very successfully. So let's talk about the arm dislocation quickly as you start to synthesize as well. Was that accurate? What did they do with the guy's arm? As an actor, it looked like it was dislocated.
I don't know how they did that, because it was either great makeup and CGI or they literally dislocated his arm. It's one of those two because it was tremendously convincing. Excuse me, I think it was probably the view that we got of his shoulder from the rear would have been a convincing looking prosthetic.
Okay.
It's no matter how good Dominic says it is, it seems like a big ass to expect him to dislocate his arm in his first film.
That's the one time you can get him to do that, I think.
So if it was Daniel Day-Lewis, then I would have believed it. That guy probably would dislocate his arm for a film role. But I have done that relocation of an arm a few times myself and done exactly that. Most commonly, you do it it's an elderly, frail lady or gentleman who doesn't have a great deal of muscle mass and doesn't have a great deal of muscle tone, and you give them just a little bit of sedation, a gentle pull, and it pops back in. Oof. But sometimes you get like a big burly rugby lad who's had his arm dislocated, and then it genuinely is 1 foot in the armpit. It's very hard work, and you get your mates in to help you. So I've done it. And it was, generally, especially if you're a young man, it's about as painful as it looked in the real film. Obviously not painful to me, though, so that's all right.
Yeah.
Let's do our synthesis. Let's try. We will bring the two films together because I do think they have got quite a bit in common, and I think that's sort of where the heart of the pod lies. Let's bring them together. The heart of the pod. What am I talking about? Isn't it? I've just made that up. It's not.
Maybe a pod. The pod of the pod.
The pod of the pod.
The peas in a pod.
The pod at the core of the pod.
God,
yeah. So I wrote down in my notes. I wrote these films are about, and I wrote ... I think they're like about outsiders. I think trying to bring them together. It is about sort of snobbery and fear and about self-loathing, I think, is an important kind of notion that they have in common. They're about fitting in, not being in with the crowd, and whether you care about that or not. But beneath all these these small personal tales, I think also they are both about the P word, which we brought up at the beginning of the show, privilege. Mm-hmm. About they're both about kind of expectation. And these kind of small nested worlds of the wealthy. That's what I wrote in my notes. Mm-hmm. And the way that the world is run, the outer world is run from inside these small nested worlds of the wealthy. Because I'd looked up some statistics. Self-Defeating in the UK is basically run by the graduates of schools like these. Boris Johnson went to Eton. Jacob Rees-Mogg went to Eton. Kwasi Kwarteng went to Eton. David Cameron went to Eton. Rishi Sunak went to Winchester College, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
These films, they're set in the past. They're set 90 years ago and 50 years ago, but they are, I think, both still about. They have something to say about the world that we see today. And it does make me wonder how have we managed to maintain an autocracy not vastly different, to the way that Europe was ruled by royal families of the 15th century. Wealthy individuals who had concentrated an enormous amount of money and were more or less buying generational power and influence through the spoils of their battles from the previous centuries. We've still got the same thing. We're still continuing. And these boys who are complaining about not getting into Cornell because of their Latin results, or the boys who are looking forward to a crummy ambassadorship instead of a good one, are still the same boys largely running the Western nations today.
Yeah, that's nice. I think you're spot on. I always think of the best films as being when you've got protagonists who are ordinary people confronting extraordinary problems. And in these two films, you basically have more elite people confronting really quite trite problems that really are not that grand at all. They're lower than ordinary, which is funny because extraordinary means better than ordinary somehow. But we don't have the same word for less than ordinary. Banal problems. So I think both films to a certain extent, from like a dramatic standpoint, they lack the real problems that the average viewer kind of confronts, as opposed to someone who's better off or more privileged. I really think that the Holdovers does a really great job of just, in terms of the craft of filmmaking, it's just really, really well shaped. It's really well performed and directed, and it's pretty enough, right? But I mean, I think Alexander Payne realized you've got to tell a good story. It just can't be a pretty picture. And I think Another Country very often is a pretty picture, and probably people were giving him money to make the film because they realized, it's going to be beautiful Oxford campus, and we're going to make it into this military school. And but I don't think it's as you said. What you talked about? Its belly or something like that. It doesn't have the same shape. It doesn't have the same tension points, and it doesn't have that extraordinary, as you said, the luxury of having a few themes that run through it in chunks of 30 and 40 minutes. I think they definitely both are very open about the privilege. I liked that. I really love the idea of a helicopter coming down onto campus to whisk away these bored kids in the Holdovers, or some of just the sheer wealth that you see in Another Country. So they're both very honest about privilege. One film is very honest about homosexuality, which is refreshing, especially because it's 40-something years old now. But I think, they're definitely about people with problems. It's just, I think to a certain extent, the success of the films depends on the degree of the elite and the degree of the problem. And I think that it's hard to relate to rich military school kids, I think, who have what could probably be labeled as lesser problems than maybe a less rich private school kid who's been kicked out of 3 schools, having some problems with his father, problems with mother, problem with his shoulders we see. So I think it's the degree of problems and the degree of protagonist, I think, somehow differentiates the two films. Good point. I made a little list, actually, of the problems that the Holdovers kind of tries to address. And as I was writing them down, I was kind of realizing more and more that
for a film set in 1970, the problems that the characters address feel very, very contemporary. So the problems are anxiety, the loneliness epidemic, I've written, institutional racism, and mental health, which is which is now like a buzzword that's become part of everyday speech following the pandemic. But in 1970, it wasn't something that people would discuss
precisely,
openly at all. I don't know whether that Holdover suggests that, look, these things existed in the 70s too, or whether it's more just saying, through the lens of the 1970s, let's discuss some of 2023's malaises.
Yeah.
But either way, I enjoyed Another Country, but I really felt the Holdovers.
Yeah.
I think it's reasonable that they go hand in hand, but they're talking about largely different things, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Shall we also talk about what else has been playing at this theatre?
I went to the theater one time to see the Holdovers. My theater is pretty small right now. It is a 13-inch laptop computer, I'd say.
Ooh.
Where I recently saw Leave the World Behind.
Oh, I've read a lot about this online, but seen very little with my own eyes.
Okay, it's on the, I think it was on the Netflix. Was it?
I think it is Netflix.
Yeah, it was probably Netflix. Julia Roberts, Ethan Hawke play this couple who are on a vacation, renting a home, and kind of the world just ends somehow. I'm not going to recommend it too warmly. It's got a 75% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's one of these films where the director had a clear vision and then shows off for about 2 hours. I can really move a camera. More than 2 hours. I guess it's 2 hours and 20 minutes. I know how to move a camera. So it's distracting because I think the story it could be really clever, but it's just not good enough considering how much talent you have there. And he definitely does know how to move a camera. It's fantastic. But every once in a while you want to say, stop moving the camera. Show me something that matters. So I watched it. It was okay. It was interesting because the Obamas, Michelle and Barack Obama, are listed as executive producers. I know that they have a production company and they're giving money out. So for some reason they saw something in it. I really wish it sort of explored its premise a little bit more, because it's this idea that by knocking out sort of the internet and the electrical grids around the United States, that the country could be attacked and overcome. But they also let animals go wild too, which doesn't make a lot of sense. So all of a sudden deer are ganging up on people, and pelicans are flying down from the sky to enjoy wealthy homeowners' swimming pools and things like that. It just doesn't. It's
the only thing that's keeping the pelicans in check is Facebook. You must realize that.
Yeah.
But, once Instagram is off, then the deers are going to be just furious.
Yes,
and they want to get their revenge on humanity.
It's interesting how quickly nature changes.
How many likes? Carry on. Yes.
So yeah, what about yourself? You've probably had some time to watch films lately.
I had the reason I'm coughing and keep turning away from the mic is because I had a little touch of the COVIDs this week, which meant that before I utterly collapsed and slept for 18 hours straight, I watched a couple of things curled up in bed, one of which was Beyond the Infinite 2 Minutes, which is a super low budget 2020 Japanese comedy, filmed as a single take. Although you can see there are a few skillful moments where they have cut two shots together. But it's probably filmed in about sort of 8 or 9 different takes. Mm-hmm. And it's a comedy about a man who discovers that there is a kind of time loop between a webcam in the cafe that he runs and a monitor up in his bedroom upstairs above the cafe, so that when he's in his bedroom, he can see 2 minutes into the future. And when he's down in the cafe, on the screen down there, he can see 2 minutes into the past. And to start with, it's just a bit unnerving and strange. And he goes up and down stairs between his bedroom and the cafe and has conversations with himself. But then some of his friends turn up and the whole thing kind of snowballs. It's joyfully short, only 70 minutes long. It's just a blast.
Great.
I laughed out loud several times. It's great fun. They really, really explore the idea. They really go for it. And at the very end of the film, you get a tiny bit of behind-the-scenes footage during the credits. And the whole film was shot on someone's iPhone. Absolutely incredible.
Wow.
It's a bloke with an iPhone and his mate with a boom. And presumably, his friends or some kind of local actors being the actors in it. It's super, super low budget. It was probably made for $25, but great fun.
Where did you see it?
It's on Apple TV.
Oh, good.
So it's just on Apple TV. I had read about it online. You can rent it on Apple TV for £1.99, or you can buy it outright for £3.99, which is probably about a quarter of the budget of the whole film. Really enjoyed that. I recommend it. Good fun. Just time to do the socials. So on Instagram, we are at 2 Real Cinema Club. You can read the blog, which is 2realcinemaclub.com. You can visit our YouTube channel, and you can email us 2realcinemaclub@gmail.com. Let us know what you think. Ask us questions, correct our mistakes, or pay our exorbitant school fees. And tell your friends about us. Leave a review if you can. It helps us out. And you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, or wherever else you get your podcasts. What are we watching next time?
Maestro, which is the Bradley Cooper project. He's directing it. He's writing it. He's performing in it. He's conducting orchestras for real. So we're looking at that. It's the story of Leonard Bernstein. And then we are watching, I think we're doing the original West Side Story. Was that the final?
Yeah,
okay,
I think
good.
so. The original.
The original, which was scored, of course, by Leonard Bernstein. So it should be very different. We're throwing a musical in. We haven't done too many musicals, I don't think. But that's a classic. For me, it sort of feels like a great holiday program. Like, this was a great holiday program with the Holdovers. But also, West Side Story is this kind of thing that on the United States on broadcast television, they'll show it. It's long. It'll fill up a whole night when they need to fill up some time when everyone's on vacation. So they'll turn it into a 4-hour event from 7 to 11 at night or something like that. So it feels perfect for the holidays. I'm really excited about these two films.
Right, can't wait. I'm whistling the tunes already. Tonight. Until next time.
Yeah.
Season's greetings to all our listeners.
Yeah.
Thanks for sticking with us through the year. We're going to get to the popcorn counter for next week. We are going to discuss film of the year. Very exciting. This is the show I've been looking forward to for a whole year.
Yeah, all year
because
long.
last year's one was so much fun. Till then, a happy festive season to you.
Yes, happy holidays. Enjoy.
Oh dear.
That's the sound of the holidays right there.